welcome back. We've got a couple more talks, and then you guys can mingle until we give you lots and lots of prizes, because we've got a lot going on today. We have a, what did you say, March of the Droids alum, veteran, if you will, Matteo from Skyscanner, and he's going to give us our next talk. So give us a nice round of applause for Matteo.
Thanks very much for the warm welcome, everyone. Today I'm going to give a talk about Android and how it's not just Google's operating system. And then obviously part of my talk will be, as last year, a competition, and there will be prizes. So stay awake after your lunch. Hopefully we'll be able to keep your attention and you might actually win something. So let's get the niceties out of the way. Thanks for coming here today. Today is Catterday and Goater Day. And I had to put in a picture of my cat because I have a 100% track record on that this year so far. So I work for Skyscanner, and I'm here representing Skyscanner. Skyscanner is a leading global travel company. We offer unbiased, free search and price comparison for flights, hotels, and car hire. And as well as a great website, which works great on mobile devices, we also have native applications for Android. So Skyscanner Flights, Skyscanner Hotels, and Skyscanner Car Hire. Just a quick show of hands. How many people in the room today are carrying an Apple device, an iPhone? 1? 2? Wow. Well, one doesn't simply come to an Android event carrying an iPhone. But don't worry, that's fine. If you want to participate in the competition on your Apple device, you can do that as well, because we also have apps for iOS, as well as a flights apps for BlackBerry and Windows Phone. So we don't leave that many people out of it. Tizen as well. So, if you want to, you can download the app. You'll need this to participate in the competition. Part of the competition will be using the app to find flights and then interacting with me on Twitter. Much the same as last year, if any of you attended March of the Droids in Bournemouth. Let's move on to the tech side of my talk. So I'm doing this because I've always really wanted to use a Wikipedia quote in a university. Any university lecturer would cringe at this. So Android is a mobile operating system based on the Linux kernel and currently developed by Google. That's written on Wikipedia, so it must be true. So we are all here because we're mobile and tech enthusiasts. We all love Android. March of the Droids is all about Android. So there are two sides to Android. So there's the Google version of Android, the one which some people may remember, the Open Handset Alliance of Android, which is this part of Android that needs to be licensed from Google. It contains the operating system. It also contains certain proprietary levels of applications and services which you can only get if you license it from Google. Now this is the official licensing side of things, and OEMs and ODMs such as HTC, Huawei, who are here today, as well as many others, all license Android from Google. In some instances, they get slightly earlier access to the code base before the release of the operating system. And usually the first new release of Android will happen on a Nexus device. Now, it's a bit complicated, so to speak of stock Android is almost impossible. So there's the Nexus experience, which is what Google release on their Nexus devices. But what HTC do with Sense, what Samsung do with TouchWiz, is their own take on Android. They have to comply with a set of rules that Google set as part of the licensing, but don't think of HTC's Sense or Samsung's TouchWiz or any other launcher that is on top of Android as a skinned version of Android, because in a way they're actually very different. They add a lot of value, and they're their own thing. They're not skinning the stock experience. They have their own launchers and their own experience on top of the Android base. On the other side, there's the Android open source project. So that's the part that Google makes freely available to anyone. It's an open source operating system, so any of you in this room can go to the Android website, download the Android open source project, and build it from code. This has no Google services, no services on top of it at all. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you in this room have flashed a ROM on a device? That's pretty much about 80% of the people in this room. And how many of you have flashed the Google apps separately from a ROM? Everyone. So there you go. So you've had first-hand experience of how this works. So anyone building a custom ROM, if they want to do it legally, can't include any of the Google services with their ROM. They have to offer that as a separate download, and it's very, very shady on if and how Google allow that to happen. So Google don't let people put that in their ROMs directly. You can add them on sideways. Google closes an eye on that. But ultimately, it's two separate things. So examples of the first instance, the Google canonical Android OS, are all the big OEMs, all the big brands we know and love. These are, in the Western markets, the bulk of the devices you'll see in shops and for sale online. They come with Google services, which is the part of Google Apps that allows you to then use Google Hangouts, cloud messaging, use the Google Play Store, and so on. With the AOSP, you don't necessarily have to have this. There are instances where people have taken the Android open source project code and built completely new products, or forked Android and created a separate operating system based upon Android. So in Europe and the US, the most popular and probably the best known product of that is the Amazon Kindle Fire, or the Fire tablets, where Amazon have gone and taken the Android open source project, adapted it to their own needs, put their own service layer on top of Android, and have put that on the market. They don't have to deal directly with Google on anything. Some may say that the downside to that is their experience doesn't include any Google services. If you have a Fire tablet, you can't use any of Google apps on it without breaking some license somewhere. Some of you will remember that in the early days of Androids, companies like Arcos used to release tablets with Android on them. Google hadn't actually made Android capable of running on tablets. They didn't license Android to any OEMs who wanted to have tablets. And it was only after Android 3.0 Honeycomb and Ice Cream Sandwich that we started to see tablets out there with the Google apps and Google services on them. Another example of where AOSP was taken and turned into a new product where Google hadn't licensed it was Samsung's Wear devices. So the very first Samsung Gear, which I believe Ross still wears on his wrist today. Yep, there we are. So that device did not have as much love from Google as it could have had, because Samsung took the open source side of Android, put it on the watch, and then said, you have to have a Samsung smartphone with our own proprietary app to speak to the watch. And to Samsung that was good, because they had more ownership of what went on in that watch, and they could control it better. In following software updates, Samsung stopped using AOSP because they had then started playing friendly with Google, and they used Tizen. They updated the device to run on Tizen, where there was no Google interference. Samsung had complete control of the operating system stack on the device. And it's the same in other instances where, in one case, Samsung, in a way, tricked Google into approving Android on a tablet before Honeycomb by calling it a phone. It had a cell phone radio. It had the facility to make phone calls and send text messages. So the original Samsung Galaxy Tab, the 7-inch one on the right, was actually classed as a phone, not a tablet. But that's where things went. And Samsung, in a way, pushed Google into moving into tablets faster than they would have. Now, by the looks of things, you've all flashed your phones, you've all put on your custom operating systems and devices. One of the reasons people do that is because they're frustrated that OEMs take longer to release a new version of Android with new features and new improvements. Is that right? Show of hands? Yep, that's the whole reason for the existence of websites like XDA Developers and Modaco. These communities do what they can to get newer versions of Android on the devices long before, if only before the device manufacturers. Now, there's a very good reason why device manufacturers can't do that immediately. So if you look at the stack of the operating system, so from the Linux kernel all the way up to the top, the thing that deters or stops the OEMs from getting new versions of Android onto the devices are in the bottom layer. It's the hardware drivers in the Linux kernel that then speak to the rest of the operating system. That can be mitigated, that can be eliminated by having abstraction layers in between. So programs that will then go and take the old driver and make it speak to the higher parts of the operating system so that the operating system works, so that you can have Lollipop on a device that was stopped being supported by an OEM a long time ago. But that then reduces battery life, doesn't make it as efficient. So often, and we were speaking about it on the Cool Smartphone podcast this week, you'll see manufacturers release new phones with amazing specs, but still running on old versions of Android. That's because maybe the camera, or maybe the Wi-Fi radio, there are no drivers for that component to make the operating system work. So my message to you today is, don't hate the OEMs, don't hate the companies that make the devices. Often their hands are tied because it's not entirely their fault. They just don't have the drivers to make the stuff work with the new version of the operating system. They need to wait for a component manufacturer to make those drivers available. I'm saying all this because there's a lot of people complaining on Twitter, Google+, about manufacturers not making the latest and greatest version of Android available to them. The open source code may be there, but they can't do it. The other thing to take away from this is that at MWC this year, if you went to the China stand, there was lots of these wonderful little booths where OEMs would customize devices for you, most often running on MediaTek chipsets. And if you wanted to have a run of 300 to 500 handsets, they would make them for you. They would put branding on them for you. But if you wanted Google Play services, so if you wanted to appeal to Western markets, and you wanted that functionality, you had to pay extra, because they then had to go and get licensing or use their licensing that cost them time and money to implement. So hopefully that's clarified why you're not always getting the latest version of Android in your devices. Be nice to the OEM. Sometimes there's nothing they can do about it. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And then by the time they do get the drivers, they have to test it thoroughly. Right then, any questions on that section? Would anyone like to?
I've got a question for everybody. How many of you would like us to create a March of the Droids run of a couple of hundred smartphones? We'll chuck them all out, that'd be quite fun, wouldn't it?
Is that someone actually hinting that next year all March of the Droids attendees will have phones?
I can't confirm or deny Half-Life 3.
Okay.
We will see.
Well, part of the great negotiating tactic we have here is that we have two OEMs, Huawei and HTC in the room. Guys, you want to fight it out? Oh yeah, and we've got Asus as well. Apologies. But no, to be fair to Asus, one of the reasons they have commercially moved over to using Intel chipsets is that Intel actually made a commitment last year to giving timely updates to all their hardware drivers for software updates to Android. So if you have a device with an Intel chipset and you're an OEM, you're more likely to get updates to those drivers in the bottom end of the Android operating system. It makes it easier for most components. Not necessarily all of them, but it's one of the reasons there are choices within the market that sometimes people are confused by. So apart from the March of the Droids phones for next year, any other questions? No? Okay then, we'll move on. Have you all installed the Skyscanner app on your phones?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Yes,
Anyone need any extra time? Are we all there?
Which one?
The flights app. That one. Install all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a run through on how we would like the competition run on my Huawei Honor Holly. Okay. I really should have practiced my gaming out of it. So, here we go. Flights. So, you may have a slightly different interface. I may have be giving you a sneak peek at an update that's due out in a few weeks. So this is the home screen. And the competition's slightly more complicated than the other ones. The idea is that you need to use the Skyscanner Android app, or the two of you using iOS. You have to use the Skyscanner app. And when I prompt you, I'll put up a picture of a city on the screen. You have to guess where that city is, and then perform a search from Birmingham to that city, get to the details page, so wait till the results load, just see how quickly they load, then go to the details of the cheapest flight you can find, and on that page you'll have a share button, so you can share that with me on Twitter, and if you share it with me, and use the hashtag March of the Droids 2015, MOTD 2015, and include @Skyscanner, the first person to get a valid entry will win a prize. Now the prizes are in envelopes, and they entitle you to a customized Skyscanner t-shirt with your Twitter or Google Plus handle on the back of them. So just be a moment whilst I prepare this. So here's an example. This is just showing off our there we go. So this is just showing off our social login functionality. This will then allow you to log in with your Google account or your Facebook account or create a new one. And that way we can then serve you price alerts if you prefer them. So if you know you're going on holiday or you need to travel somewhere, we can monitor prices for you, send you daily or weekly emails to let you know if there are price changes. That way you can get the best value out of your trip. So let's say, for example, you're traveling to Edinburgh. I'm trying to type upside down. Okay, auto-suggest works. There we go. And you can choose any day you want. If you want to narrow down the dates, it's probably easier.